Time to talk a little MMA here on the program with the host of Ringside Report Radio, Wednesdays and Fridays here on TSN 990, 10 p.m. As well, you can check out more info on the sport at ringsidereport.net, and you can follow our guest at Dave Simon MMA on twitter.com. It's Dave Simon.
Yes, it is.
All right. Thanks for reaffirming it.
Yes. What's going on?
Saturday night was hyped as one of the biggest events in UFC history, and I don't think I'm extending that too much. I think there really was that much hype surrounding Anderson Silva's next fight, and it happened to be last night, and it was against a familiar opponent.
Yeah, Chael Sonnen, they fought in August 2010. Chael beat Anderson up for 5 rounds, well, almost the complete 5 rounds, 4 and, let's say, 3/4, until Anderson pulled off a triangle choke and then pulled it into an armbar to force the submission. In 2010, they met again last night after a lot of trash talk from Chael Sonnen. Couple years worth of trash talk, really, from Chael, calling Anderson out any opportunity he had. And Anderson was really respectful, didn't say much about Chael up until a couple weeks before the fight. He let it go. He said he was going to beat down Chael Sonnen. He was going to destroy him, and he did beat down Chael Sonnen last night. Second round TKO victory for Anderson Silva, ducking a spinning back fist that sent Chael crashing to the mat. Anderson with a vicious knee to the body to Chael Sonnen. It was so fast, it almost looked like it was an illegal knee to Chael's face. But my good friend Yves Lavigne was the third man in the octagon last night, and he got the call right, as he always does. Great job by Yves last night. Made the right call. It was a knee to the body. Anderson then with big punches to Chael. Chael tried to get up. Anderson knocked him down with even more punches and forced the TKO. Very impressive performance from Anderson Silva. The first round went like the first round of the last fight. Chael took him down, kept him down, even improved from the guard all the way up into a mount, which, if you know jiu-jitsu, you know that that's pretty much the most advantageous position you can have. You can have the mount, or maybe a back mount would be better, but Chael getting up there wasn't able to pull off a lot of damage in that first round. Anderson back on his feet for the second round, and he was able to take care of business. Watching that fight through the first round, did you get the sense it was going to be different than the last one? It felt exactly the same. First round, they collide in the octagon. Boom, right away. No feeling out process. Anderson looks to throw wild punches. Chael just puts his head in his chest and takes him right down to the mat and kept him down for an entire round. And I said, oh, well, Anderson needs to be careful next round. He needs to not just rush into it, and he needs to defend that takedown. And he did just that. So, the first round looked like it was going to be the same thing, but, the first fight, we knew afterwards that Anderson Silva had broken ribs. This time, we knew that Anderson was healthy, and I was expecting Anderson Silva to win this one, just like he did the last one, maybe not in the same fashion. I actually called a knockout, a TKO, or a KO victory before the third round, so I was correct in my prediction. I expected Anderson to win this fight. I'd been telling anyone who would listen that Anderson Silva was going to win this fight, and he did. It was another great performance from the 37-year-old middleweight champion, his 10th title defense. That's the most in UFC history. He is the greatest of all time and continued to cement his legacy last night. Now, one of the things that I read about this fight, or rather this card afterwards, was the gate, that this had raised the most money ever for a UFC event, $7 million, something like that. But you think back to those huge events at the Bell Center and in Toronto with at Rogers Center. So what was the story? Was it just a huge price to pay per ticket? It was the biggest gate, biggest money draw for the UFC in the United States. They make more money in Canada on the attendance. I mean, when you have 13,000, 14,000 seat venue in Las Vegas compared to 55,000 strong in Toronto, they're obviously going to do more money in Toronto. I think they made something around $14 million on the gate in Toronto, so it was the biggest gate in American history
but still,
for the UFC.
At only 14,000, you knew that they had to have a pretty high ticket.
Oh, yeah, they must have jacked up the prices in Vegas. But from what I saw from the post-fight press conference, Dana White saying that pay-per-view-wise, they're expecting to do well over 1 million buys, and they're expecting this to be maybe the biggest pay-per-view revenue in the company's history as well. And the pay-per-view was the same price. People were just interested in it. They had more people at the weigh-ins on Friday night than they'd ever had before. There was more traffic on UFC.com this week than they'd ever had before. More people watched the press conference. By over 1 million people, more people watched the press conference earlier this week on UFC.com. So this was a big fight, a big deal, and they made big money.
So at the age of 37, you mentioned one of the greatest of all time, if not the. Does have 4 losses though on his record. At the age of 37, where does he go from here? Are there any super fights for him? Some people saying, John Jones. Is that even a possibility?
No, I don't think that it is a possibility. You actually saw Anderson shake hands with John Jones before he entered the cage. The guys that Anderson was shaking hands with actually was pretty cool. You see him, he shakes hands with LeBron James, he shakes hands with John Jones, and then he gives Steven Seagal a kiss on the cheek before he enters the octagon. It was an interesting melange of guys around Anderson last night. John Jones is much bigger than Anderson Silva. He's a 205-pound champion. I don't think they're going to fight. I don't think they're ever going to fight. John Jones has come out and said, I don't want to fight Anderson. I don't think Anderson wants to fight Jones. I don't think that fight is going to happen. Both of these guys have made enough money that there's nothing the UFC can really offer them to make them fight, so I don't think that fight will ever happen.
What does Silva fight at, roughly?
185. Well, okay. I mean, 185 is what he's, cutting down to. In the cage, he could be around 190, 195. And John Jones, he's cutting down to 205, so he's walking around at 220, 225. There's a big difference. I've seen them stand right next to each other, a couple feet away from me, and I realized, wow, there's a gigantic size difference between Jones and Anderson. I realized in that moment that there was no way that Jones and Anderson would ever fight. And I also realized at the same time, because George St. Pierre was sitting on the other side of Anderson Silva, I also realized, wow, Anderson's a lot bigger than GSP. So if you're looking at super fights, either between Anderson and St. Pierre or Anderson and Jones, I wouldn't hold your breath. I think that there are enough contenders at 185 pounds right now in the UFC that Anderson, he's still got a few more interesting fights. This Wednesday night, you've got Mark Munoz fighting an undefeated wrestler, a young guy in his 20s in Chris Weidman. I think that's going to be an interesting fight. And if Weidman can get past Munoz, I think that there's going to be talk of maybe Chris Weidman is the next guy to challenge Anderson Silva. He's got the style that would put Anderson in some trouble. So I think that would be an interesting fight. The Munoz fight also would be interesting. So we'll see who wins on Wednesday night. And then there's another fight going down in August, Tim Boetsch fighting Hector Lombard. Or rather, no, that was supposed to be in August. It got moved to July 21st in Calgary at UFC 149, the next pay-per-view. Tim Boetsch, Hector Lombard. Lombard was the middleweight champion over in Bellator. It's going to be his first fight in the UFC. And I think if Lombard can come out victorious, he would be next in line for Anderson Silva. So there are still guys at middleweight that would make very interesting fights for Anderson Silva. If I had my pick, I would like to see Hector Lombard in there with Anderson. I think that would be a great fight.
All right, Dave, and before we let you go, the local content didn't fare so well here last night.
Yeah, not so good. If you were banking on the local guys, I actually went 9-2 in my fight predictions over 11 fights, and the 2 guys I got wrong were the Montreal guys. Ivan Menjivar losing a close decision to Mike Easton, and Patrick the Predator Cote also losing a close decision, 30-27 on all 3 judges' scorecards to Kung Lee, but I thought it was a pretty close fight, but Kung Lee landed more strikes. I think he landed better strikes, and I did have him winning. As for Menjivar, tough night for him, as he was maybe going to punch his ticket to a title shot, but that fight I think was closer. I think it could have gone either way, but Menjivar lost that one 30-27 on 2 judges' scorecards, 29-28 in the decision. So not a great night for Montrealers. But a good night for Anderson Silva.